Well, hello everyone again, and thank you for joining us for an incredible panel discussion we're about to have here on physician best practices and supporting life transitions for people living with rare. This panel is sponsored by Open Health, and I am going to turn that over to, which is an incredible organization. And Gavin Jones, I'm going to turn this over to you and let you take and introduce everybody. And thank you again, Gavin and Open Health and everyone on this panel for your willingness to participate and share.
Thanks very much, Jeff. And thanks everyone for joining this panel as part of 24 Hours in Rare Congress. We really appreciate the invitation from Eden and Jeff to run this session. I'm Gavin Jones, Open Health's Global Advisor for Rare Diseases. Over the past few months, our thoughts have been focused on an often neglected challenge in rare disease. In some ways, it's a growing issue as the treatment and management of many rare diseases is improving, meaning patients are living longer, fuller lives. This is clearly very positive and will hopefully continue to be of wider benefit to more and more people living with a rare disease. But we need to recognize that it's increasing the impact of an already prevalent challenge for patients and their families. And that is how to better understand and support people living with rare transition through life. There are many life transitions. For example, the transition from adolescence to adult care, moving into higher education, finding a job, starting a family, stopping work, and gender-specific issues like pregnancy and the menopause. We intend to have a very broad conversation today rather than solely focus on one of these points of transition. I also want to highlight that there are other resources available at our transition booth at this Congress. This includes a great conversation focused solely on the topic of supporting adolescent transition, which I think, given its Caregiver Day, could well be of interest to some of the audience out there. Families living with rare disease face significant physical and psychological effects of navigating life transitions, as there are numerous pathways and societal constraints to overcome. Physicians obviously play an important role in the care of a family living with rare disease, often over a long period of time. As such, they can be a positive or indeed negative influence over life transitions. This panel will focus on how clinical best practice can be improved to enable increasingly more positive influences. A quick note here to say that when we talk about physicians, we're also considering any member of the multidisciplinary team, including, for example, nurses, dietitians, and physios. So in this session, we'll hear experiences of how people have managed life transitions whilst living with rare, and how physicians have influenced these. We'll also hear from physicians on their experience and views on how consultations can be improved to better support life transitions. Then we'll hear from medical communication experts on how scientific exchange needs to adapt. And we'll discuss how patients, caregivers, and their advocacy organizations can play a role. We'll be welcome to take questions from the audience. So if you've got any comments or thoughts or questions, please put them into the Q&A function and we'll get to them before the end of the session. That's enough from me. We're going to get to the panel now. We've got a great panel assembled, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And in this order, if it's okay with everyone, we'll start with Tom, Nathan, and Rita. Hopefully we'll come to Jude at some point, and then Cindy and Mike, if you can introduce yourselves. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Gavin. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. My name's Thomas Smith, and I am a CF cystic fibrosis patient. I'm 33 and I live in the northeast of England. I've got a range of, I suppose, professional interests. I have my 9 to 5 is a leadership position in my local government, but I have all kinds of advocacy and patient engagement interests. I contract to medcoms companies. I work for a research ethics committee. I'm a trustee at Mind. I do some stuff for the European Medicines Agency and all kinds of stuff like that. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Tom. Nathan.
Yeah, hello everybody, good afternoon. My name is Nathan Peck. I'm the CEO of Cure VCP Disease, I'm actually a patient with VCP disease, which stands for the Valicin-containing protein. And a patient can get 1, 2, 3, 4 different disease, which include inclusion body myopathy, early onset Paget's disease of bone, frontal temporal dementia, ALS is also in that. So I just have the inclusion body myopathy. It's an adult onset autosomal dominant disease. So my mother is deceased from this disease. My aunt is deceased from the disease, and I have 2 uncles with the disease. So we started Cure VCP disease in 2018 and have just been very active in recruiting patients, as well as bringing together the research and medical communities. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Over to you, Rita.
Yes, hello for everybody. Yeah, I have 2 identities. My first identity is that I'm a medical doctor, and I've worked over 10 years as a real doctor in the hospital. And then I changed to clinical research. I worked for 9 years as a medical director in the drug development industry. So I have a really deep insight to that. During that time, I was diagnosed with Li-Fraumeni syndrome, which is the most aggressive form of cancer predisposition syndromes. I'm not only a patient, I'm only a mother of 2 mutation carriers. So I would like to get some or give you some insight from that perspective as well. I am a patient representative in ERA-Ginturist, which is the European Organization for Hereditary Cancer Syndromes.
Thank you, Rita. Over to you, Cindy.
So thank you, Gavin. I'm really honored to be on this panel. I work for Alexion Pharmaceuticals, and my role is really in the medical education of healthcare practitioners. So I'll be speaking a bit to that, and I have just really been fascinated with rare disease and the rare disease community, and happy to support in any way we can.
Thanks, Cindy. Over to you, Mike, and then we'll come to you, Jude. Thanks. Glad you've made it. Mike.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Thiessen. I'm a medical director at Open Health. I have a background in biochemistry with a PhD, and I've assisted with a lot of communications, mostly to medical audiences about rare diseases, currently narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia, which are sleep conditions, but also in the past, cystic fibrosis and Friedreich ataxia and a number of other conditions.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Jude.
Hello, I'm sorry I'm so late. A few technical glitches here. I'm Jude Bobbier. I'm a consultant rheumatologist. I live and work in London in the UK, and I work at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, and I have a special interest in rare bone diseases, particularly things like osteogenesis imperfecta, hypophosphatasia and X-linked hypophosphatemic rickets, but many others besides. So really pleasure to be here, and my heart rate is just coming down as I've made it to join you.
Great to have such a brilliant, diverse panel, and also a cross-continent panel. You will have noticed by different people's lighting that Rita is already in dark. Tom, myself, and Judith, we're in dusk, and then we have people who still have lots of daylight to get through before they reach the end of the day. So great to have you all on board. Just to let you know, Mike and Jude, you sound a little bit quiet still, so if you can just, Jude especially, if you can just talk into the microphone on your headset, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So we're going to get started with some questions to the panel, and then we'll come to more broader discussion and Q&A from the audience. And I'm going to come to Tom first. And Tom, you've lived with a rare condition since birth, and we've already discussed how transition from adolescence into adult care was a bit bumpy for you. I'm sure you've come across a lot of physicians in that time. Have there been ones that have made transition easier? And what have they done to support you?
Where to start with that question? The short answer is not really, which is part of the problem and part of why I'm interested in this particular panel. But what has changed is my relationship with the team that I've got at the moment, because it hasn't. The people that I work with, I suppose, that can be how it is when you have like a rare disease. It is kind of working together. The people that look after me, I suppose, I've known for probably around over 15 years at this point. So I'm 33, transitioned from pediatrics to adult when I was 16. But yeah, what has changed is that, well, I should say the people that I have the best relationship with when it comes to my care are the people who level with me, I suppose. I don't like the idea of people kind of coming down to my level, but actually I think it's more of a meeting in the middle and a growing together, because over the past 16 years, I really think that not just with cystic fibrosis, but all kind of adult transitions in care are different. And I feel like we're kind of working together a lot more. And I think there's a mutual recognition here of, like, I personally feel like I have the same standard of knowledge as my clinicians. It's just in a different area. It's in me, I suppose, and the patient experience. But yeah, generally speaking, the people I have the best relationships with, it's much more of a conversation, and it's much more of a team work ethic, really.
Yeah. And how has your experiences modified your approach, Tom, to getting the most out of your consultations?
I think looking back now, and another part of the reason why I'm really interested in this panel is because you experience a transition in care, and certainly when you're 16, you don't even think about it. So it's really interesting to look back. But I think what's changed in my approach is I am ultimately technically in the driving seat, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like you have a driver and a kind of a co-driver kind of thing. But actually what I've learned over the years is being cared for is a skill, and it's something that you need to learn how to do, because I've said it before, but it's very, very similar to your first kind of appointment alone is very, very similar to your first day at work, where, you know, you have people kind of showing you around. This is where the photographer is. This is where you make your drinks, whatever. You're qualified, but you don't actually know how to do the job. And I think it's taken me a number of years, and obviously I have a lot of professional interest in patient engagement and advocacy. And now I am 100% the patient that I want to be. I feel like I'm informed on all decisions that are made. I no longer go along with things without asking questions, but also people don't really treat me like that either. So it's been a long road. I'm where I need to be, but actually I really, really take a lot of control in my consultations, and nobody fights me for it. And actually, one of the practical implications of my care team, which is a 160-mile round trip away, is that I need to, I suppose my life is much busier now than when I was 16. And what I need to do is cram in 2 months worth of to-dos into those kind of hour and a half, 2-hour appointments that I have down in Leeds, because I don't want my disease to kind of really take up any more of my time than that. And I suppose now I'm an adult, now that I'm kind of in control and I can advocate for my own interests, I can squeeze that time and really, just wring every last drop of opportunity and productivity out of it. So yeah, it's very, very different.
Yeah. No, thanks, Tom. And that experience from childhood into adulthood, I think, is a really interesting one, and no doubt we'll come back to it. But I want to take a different perspective now. And Nathan, your condition is adult onset. So how have physician consultations been for you since diagnosis?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed in my late 30s and or started feeling symptoms even in my late 30s. So when I went to the doctor the first time, they looked at me like, "What are you talking about? I've never heard of this." Mm-hmm. And so I spend a lot of time educating, the physician on my condition, and certainly having a mother that went through this and seeing it for 20 years. I have more experience than they probably have. I actually see an ALS doctor because of the ALS connection to VCP disease, but I'm his only VCP patient. And so, the thing that he's been great at is understanding where he can plug in to be able to help, with whatever my needs are. So a lot of what we do with Cure VCP is just educate our patients that, don't have the expectation that there's some magic pill or something. You're going to have to, as Thomas said, it's a very collaborative joint relationship in terms of those communications and education. But the physician needs to be willing to listen and understand where they can plug themselves in to help the patient. So when I was going on a long-term disability, my physician was awesome in terms of doing the paperwork. They were very experienced because of ALS patients with guiding it through. And so that was very much a relief and a burden that was taken off of my plate. But at the same time, just a recent example, I have some issues with my hand. And so that doctor was like, well, maybe it's carpal tunnel, or just get a brace or a new mouse or something like that. Well, I went to my general physician, who then, listened to me a little bit differently and scheduled me for an EMG where, there's no neuropathy in my hand, which was great, so I'm glad that we went through that experience. But, a side effect from the EMG was that I had more range of motion in my shoulder. And so it was like, well, this is kind of interesting. And there's no documentation or any, in a standard of care about it. But my general physician was like, yeah, go try acupuncture. Just go see, even if it's in your head, if it provides benefit to the patient and helps your mentality, your mental well-being, then it's worth trying. So I think, versus just being very locked into, we're developing a standard of care, for the disease, but being open to trying different things and again, that's that working together collaboratively, patient physician. So I think just being open to it. So
yeah, makes sense. And Nathan, as you've approached physicians as the expert often, what do they get defensive around that?
No, I don't think so. But I think sometimes there might be a mindset that, well, I don't know what to do. There's no therapy. There's no therapeutics for this. And so it's almost just kind of signing off on it and, letting it, go on our way. And that's why I tell that example of the hand, because even though neuropathy, I don't have ALS, still just listening and thinking about referring to other doctors. So a facet of this disease is Paget's disease of bone. And so, going to a rheumatologist, I need that advocacy from the physician, to put me in the right place. And so that's, again, a lot of the stuff that, my wife is actually working on with the standard of care is how do we make those interconnections within, and it needs to be the physician that helps with that, that's open to that, not that it's a burden to the patient, but that they're listening and trying different things. It's not in their head. Everybody knows what their body's feeling. So. Yeah,
absolutely. Thanks, Nathan. Really interesting. Moving on to you, Rita. You've got, as you say, a dual personality in that you trained as a physician, and then in alongside that you developed a rare condition. What advice would you go back and give yourself as a new doctor about supporting patients through life transitions?
Yes, I think it's really difficult to be special about life transmission. I think the much bigger problem is that on the general care and in identifying a rare condition, my most important recommendation is that doctors should accept that they just can't be a doctor who knows everything about the rare condition. So it's not a problem if they don't know it. Every time when I meet with a new doctor, my first question is, have you ever heard about my syndrome? And I always see on their faces that they are just thinking, okay, can I tell the truth or shall I pretend that I know everything? And I think we have just so limited time, and if we play plays and not be honest, then we lose really valuable time. So it's much better to say to the rare patients, no, I have never heard about it. Can we it to me because I don't even know how to write it, it's not a problem. And rare disease patients are used to this. The other point is it's for transition, but for general as well. Be open for alternatives. And I absolutely understand what Nathan said about acupuncture, but there are other options as well, like off-label drug use or any other alternative medicine. As we do not have treatment or for the majority of the rare diseases, the doctors should be much more open. And if you have a new doctor, if you have to change, then it takes of this, and then believe that the patient has made lots of research about it. And this is absolutely true because we do not really have evidence-based data for rare disease because of the low numbers. So then we have to be open for alternatives.
Yeah, makes complete sense, Rita. Thank you. And coming to you, Jude, what are the listening to these experiences? What's resonated with you, and how have you adapted your practice and consultation with patients over the years?
Yeah, so lots of it does resonate, and lots of it sounds great. I love the driver and co-driver analogy that Thomas said, and I'm fully aware that sometimes I might be the driver, but sometimes I'm the co-driver, and that's actually okay. And the sort of idea about being a team and working together and all of that, I mean, and being open, because I'm fully aware that for a lot of my patients who've got rare bone diseases, they know as much as I do about it. Sometimes they know more than I do about it, and they know different things about it because they know what it's really like to live with it. And however much I can sit in a clinic, 4 times a week and meet X number of people and can say, oh yes, I've got so many people with this disease, I'm not living with it 24/7. And so I can't fully understand everything about it ever. And you asked about how my practice has changed. And I think, so where I am now, I've been here for 3.5 years and seeing a lot more people with rare diseases than I did in my previous job. And I think I can't remember who said it. I think it might have been Thomas, but because I scribbled a couple of things down while you were talking, but having the confidence to say, I don't know. And actually, like Rita saying, I don't know, I haven't heard of your syndrome before. Can you tell me about it? Like you say, can you tell me how I spell it? Can we Google it quickly together so that I can look at, I don't know, a rare disease website, or, because Orphanet or something where I know I'm going to get reliable information, but I don't know about your disease. And so I've definitely got more confident in not knowing everything, and I have been that doctor that kind of thinks, can I wing it? How am I going to try and wing it here and pretend like I know about this condition when I've only heard about it 10 seconds ago? So Rita, I've pulled those faces before that you mentioned when I'm in clinic. But I really do think this idea of teamwork and working together is where we need to be, and that in some patients there are treatments that I can use. I use quite a lot of off-label drugs. In other patients there is no proven treatment, and I'm open to discussing trying anything and can at least put some sort of expert opinion on whether that may or may not help, or probably more importantly, might it do any harm, because that's probably the most important thing to avoid. And also that idea of collaborating with other physicians or other therapists or other professionals, and not being embarrassed or ashamed to, because there's no shame in it, to reach out to somebody else and say, could you have a look at this person with me? Could we talk about it? Could you offer, what can you do to help this person? So I very much often see myself as I don't have all the answers, but maybe I can signpost patients in the right direction, or get them in touch with the right people, or write the right letter that allows their housing place to do something they need. So, you know, looking at that, the whole person, because often I don't have a medical fix for their rare disease.
Sure. Sure. Thank you, everyone. That's been really, really useful insight, and maybe we need to reconsider how we educate physicians, and the pharmaceutical industry has an important responsibility and role in that physician education. So I want to bring in a couple of medical communications experts now, and I'm going to start with you, Mike, and just get a sense from you, hearing that. And you've obviously delivered many years of scientific writing in the rare disease space, and you know we as an industry probably focus a lot on that science. What are you hearing about how we potentially need to adapt our approach?
Right, yeah, that's true, Gavin. We have focused really on communicating the science, in my experience, to medical professionals, and you know, what we're hearing today is really eye-opening for me. There's a lot more for me to know, and for physicians to know about how to support patients through their transitions, and how to work with them as a team. And we really do need to think more broadly beyond the science, very clearly into all the aspects that people have discussed today. And I think there's a great need for additional tools and approaches to facilitate that.
Great stuff. Thanks, Mike. I agree wholeheartedly. And coming to you, Cindy. Oh, Rita, before we go,
can I just just one thought to that? So I think what would help a lot for transition, if rare disease would have some information which is specialty specific. So for example, if they move somewhere else, and if they have a new dentist who of course do not know anything about this rare disease, what is important for a dentist about this rare disease? And I had the bad experience that if I bring with me a scientific article, if it's really good, but if it's a really good review article, but if it's 8 pages or 5 pages, they just won't read it. So we just need something which is short and specialty specific. But
yeah. And would you
kindergarten or for the school as well? Yeah. So for everybody, where we transition, where we move to a new life situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you suggest, Rita, that the patient holds that and they are empowered to have the right information for the right stakeholder?
Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense. Cindy, looking at you as an organization and considering this broader approach, have you examples of where you've started thinking more broadly about this, maybe specific and summary-led information to help physicians and the multidisciplinary team better support their patients beyond the science?
Yeah, so in my role in medical affairs, you know, our primary purpose is to deliver accurate information. And we do that about disease state and treatment, and it's primarily with physicians, but we focus ourselves on the importance of the patient and always looking at things through the patient's perspective. And then, to Rita's point, engaging members of the team who may have different levels of understanding. So if you're talking to a geneticist versus a genetic counselor versus an internal medicine doctor. So one thing that we were working on with Gavin and his team is to look at it, sort of an innovative way of doing that. This is a project that's in development, but looking at a podcast and a way to have a discussion and to always innovate based on what we're hearing and what we're learning, and really to seek what we call scientific exchange, so that when we're interacting with healthcare professionals, we're listening, and we're trying to bring the best quality information that we can, but primarily to listen and adapt with the hope of helping the patient as much as possible.
Thanks, Cindy. And I think that two-way conversation is absolutely critical, to hear really what's required from the physician community, and also to feedback on their needs and what their opinion is around their patient needs. And that sort of opens up, I think, a topic of conversation I'd like to explore on how patients out there can work with their physicians to support them better. And I say that because around the panel we have some what I would describe as expert patients who really advocate for not only their own care, but that for the community of patients that they are looking to serve. So we get a skewed view on a panel like this in terms of, you know, how adept the patient community are at the moment in terms of effectively working with their physicians to modify approaches and to find new ways of working together. So Tom, I'm going to come to you first, given your experience through adolescence and into adulthood. And I just want some sort of simple tips that you think can assist in better consultations between patients and physicians.
I think I'm really glad that you asked me the question, because I was just sitting there thinking about something else I said earlier in the week, that whether you're a patient speaking to a physician, whether you're a drugs company speaking to a physician, or a medcoms company speaking to a patient, whatever, I think there's obviously like a really important emphasis on patient centricity, and, you know, I suppose more patient-led care. But you have to do not you, obviously anybody, we have to do a better job of explaining to all stakeholders why it's in their interest to do this. And I think one thing that was jumping out to me just then was, I feel like I suppose most of my advocacy training has been done in Europe, and I feel like pre-pandemic I spend loads and loads of time with people who know far more about their disease than I do about mine. But when they ask a question, it's 3 times longer than the answer. And I think it's really important. Being an expert isn't just enough at all, but you have to be able to speak to people in a way that they actually want to listen to, especially if you want change. If you want something from people, you need to communicate with them effectively. And I think that it's kind of the same thing whether you're a lay patient, a patient expert, whatever. You have to create an environment where people are comfortable being honest, and you have to, you know, compromise, give and take. You can't say, well, I've heard about this thing called patient centricity, and therefore I demand that I have this operation or take that drug or stop this one. It doesn't work like that. I think it's actually a people problem. It's not really about whether you're a patient or a physician or whoever. It's just about effective communication, being persuasive, and just being nice to people. You know, it's not rocket science.
Thanks, Tom. And I'd like to get a physician view as well. So I'm going to come to Jude.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that what I love sometimes is when my patients bring me information I don't know, or even if it's information I do know, that they bring it and we can discuss it together. So I'll give you an example. It's not actually myself, but my colleague, Richard Keane, who one of the conditions we look after is called FOP, which has got a really long name, fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. But basically your muscles turn into bone, and it's no, you know, there is no proven treatment at the moment. One of our patients came to see Richard and said, do you know what, there's a meeting about this condition that I have, you know, you should come. And he did, and from the beginning of that, that's about 5 years ago now, we're now the National Centre for Studies in FOP and are hugely involved in that patient area. But we wouldn't have got as involved and we wouldn't have been doing all the research that we're now doing if a patient hadn't told us about a meeting. So, you know, if there's a resource or if you've got a patient society that supports your condition, your physician might not know about it. I mean, often I'm doing the other way around and saying to the patient, have you heard of the Brittle Bone Society or the whatever the society is for their condition? But sometimes it comes the other way. You know, have you seen this latest thing from my patient group? What do you think about it? And I think that comes back to just having, and also having space in the consultation to allow for those conversations. Because if I've got my list of questions I want to ask you in my head, and I've got my tick boxes that I think, right, I need to know about broken bones and whatever else, calcium and all these other things, but actually that might not be top of your priority. So, you know, bringing your questions. I know it's scary going to see doctors and people forget everything they want to say. So bring that list. We might sigh inwardly a little bit when you pull it out of your bag, but actually that's where the nuggets are. That's where the stuff is that you really care about. Because I can sideswipe you for 20 minutes talking about calcium or something, but what you really want to know is, how am I going to start work, or can you help me at university, or I'm getting older, what happens now I'm going through the menopause? So my tips for patients would be, do write it down. If you type it up and want to leave me a copy, that's even better, because I don't have to write any of it down. That's fine. I just stick it in your notes. And don't be scared to bring things that you've found that you think are helpful, because your physician may well not know about them.
Yeah. And I think, you know, particularly in rare disease, you know, it's about having the humility that we're all learning together, and everyone brings a perspective that helps us all just creep a little bit further forward in the management of patients to deliver better outcomes. And I think, you know, that listening to the patient voice is just so important. And Cindy, I just wanted to come to you and ask about how you collaborate with the patient team within Alexion to make sure that the voice is heard within your medical affairs strategy.
Yeah, so I think what I can say about that question is we definitely have touch points, and it's a real shared focus. In terms of explaining exactly how it works, I don't have good examples. I do have touch points with advocacy, and we're, I think, more focused on the medical side of saying, let's talk a lot about patient-reported outcomes. Let's look a lot at functional measures and things that really matter to patients.
Great, thanks, Cindy. I'm going to move on to another topic, and I'm going to start with Nathan, and then I'm going to come to Rita, if that's okay. And that is really, you know, there will be patient advocacy leads out there from the rare disease community. And I suppose, Nathan, your experience of you as a patient group educating physicians, and as you say, developing this new standard of care for VCP, how has your experience been, and have you any lessons learned in your engagement with the physician community and your attempts to better educate them around the disease?
Well, I think it's establishing that trust first. So we're, you know, through other activities we've done in terms of, you know, a lot of the physicians or doctors want to know, you know, how many patients there are. So we're able to bring kind of that data together. But I think it's as simple as handling a lot of logistics. What we find is a lot of the physicians and researchers, they're curious about this disease too, but it's a lot of work to go out there and find a lot of these things. And so if we can make it easier for them, whether it's coordinating meetings with other peers and experts or documenting, maybe writing some of the stuff for them, we've found a lot of engagement. I know in my wife's standard of care effort, we got 30 different clinicians. And clinicians, especially MD, PhDs, are hard to get a hold of. Everybody's busy, got a lot of things going on. But the fact that we kind of coordinate it and pull it together, and early on with one of the researcher, PhD, MD, PhD, I think he was relieved that I wasn't coming to him for a fix-all solution or looking for something. What I came as a patient was, how can I help you? What can I do to help you be more effective, to help your research, to get published or whatever. And so that's the approach that we've taken as a patient advocacy organization is, what can we do to assist? We know it's a long shot. There's a lot of work that needs to be done for treatments, therapeutics, but and so we're doing a prospective natural history study. We're actually funding that. The research, a lot of the clinicians have wanted that work to be done for many, many years, whether it was writing a grant, but we're going ahead and doing it. We found experts. I'll be speaking, about that later in the month, but, there's a lot of, us being able to pull the patients together to train and teach them where a researcher or a physician doesn't have to do that. Those are things that we can do to help advance the science and help patients at the same time.
Thanks, Nathan.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. As you say, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort, but I think that trust element is very important, that they view your work as really valuable in helping move their knowledge forward. So I think that's the critical thing in developing that constructive relationship. I was going to come to Rita now and ask about the European Reference Network. For those that don't know, these are networks set up to connect specialties in rare disease and to ensure that pathways and best practice is shared across different countries in Europe. So Rita, you mentioned that you're involved in Genturis. Have you in that work seen a recognition of the knowledge that the patient community are bringing, and is it down to individual patients, or has it been patient groups involved in moving projects forward?
We have different levels where patient representatives are involved. So we have 8 patient representatives who have full membership. But of course, if we, for example, right now we will move to European to produce a guideline for a rare syndrome, where we do not have a patient representative, then of course we will choose patients from outside of the network. And of course, already those guidelines which we already produced, we tried to connect more and more. So there I am, for example, for my syndrome, the main contact point, 10 different patients who participated in the review of the guideline. I wouldn't say that the work between the expert and the patient's representative is perfect. I think there is still much more space with improvement. So we want always more and more and more. What is really good that we have a very good relationship with the experts, and then we learn together. So the whole network is only 2 years or already 3 years old. So it's just a very young initiative. So I'm very optimistic, and we already did lots of good stuff. We use patient journeys, for example. We participated in the guideline development. The patient registry is something what the ERNs wants to support as well, but it's a really difficult project. Patients would like to get, for example, there also the opportunity to let know what we think, what are the key factors, what they should collect in these patient registries.
Yeah. So good progress, but more work to be done. But it's great to hear that there are examples like patient journey mapping is a great opportunity for consensus and putting the patient very firmly in the centre of consideration. And it's great to also to hear that the guidelines had input from the patient community. Jude, have you had, looking at the different perspective, or Rita, do you want to say anything else? Your connection's not perfect, but is there anything else you wanted to say?
Just one short. So I think we can work together efficiently only if we will have much more patient experts. So I would say that right now we do not have enough patient experts and patients who really know about drug development, about registries, about all this stuff. So we in the patient community should try to push that the experts have more contact persons.
Sure. And organisations like Neurodis and Nord do help upskill the patient community, but it sounds like there's more effort that needs to happen.
Yeah, or I don't know whether you know Elpathy, who makes training for patients.
Yeah, definitely. So if patients in Europe are looking for support, then Elpathy is probably their best approach, or Neurodis. Good. From a physician perspective, Jude, have you had a lot of engagement with patient advocacy groups, and how have you worked with them to learn about their specific conditions?
Yeah, well, yes, which is good. So I'm trying to think where to start. Sorry. So one of the conditions I look after is Osteogenesis Imperfecta, and in the UK we have a society called the Brittle Bone Society, and they've been great, and it works on many different levels actually. So they run an annual conference for patients, to which they invite physicians to be speakers, but they also have patients who are speakers. So that's that kind of working together. And I think for the first one, I was just asked to come and sort of facilitate a small workshop, but I got to sit through the whole thing, which was really interesting. And in fact, one of my research projects came from an idea that a patient said at one of those things, and I was like, that's what I can go and weigh and do. They also run research grants, so a bit like Nathan was talking about. So they'll fund research as well, small projects, but and the idea I had at their meeting, they've then given us a little bit of money to be able to fund, and also just those that there's a little bit different of going to a conference where the patients are there as opposed to a conference which is just the clinicians. And normally if you go to a scientific conference, there might be the occasional patient advocate who stands up and says something at the front, or there might be some in the hall with all the drug companies, some of the support societies. But actually to be, having your lunch with some patients who you don't know, and also mixing with the other specialists in that rare disease space is really, really helpful. And there's definitely a couple of societies that have done that. And then also just working together along some of the stuff around guidelines. So I know that the XLH Foundation and the XLH community in the UK is looking at working up some nice resource for patients actually about what do you ask your doctor when you kind of helping patients to prepare for coming to see the doctor. What questions should you be asking the doctor so you can remind us the things that we forget to ask you about, and we're in that together. So those sort of things. And actually I also sometimes get direct communication from the patient societies about one of my patients, where the patient has contacted them with a question, they've taken the consent of the patient, and then they've contacted me to say, could I get a therapist, or could I get a wheelchair assessed, or something like that. So kind of so many levels that can work on. And also the idea Rita said of the kind of one-page document about your condition. Now, ideally, that would be tailored to the individual patient, but one place to start is often patient groups will have resources on their website, and that can be a really good place. I know, like the Fibrous Dysplasia Society in the UK has a two-sided page about fibrous dysplasia that you could take along and show any doctor that you see. So yeah, lots of different levels. It's actually really interesting when you think about it.
It's too long. 2 pages are too long.
I'm interested, so I like 2 pages. I probably would have read the 6 or 8 that you brought to your physician, but
great stuff. Top tip from Alan. Always love Alan's tips at Congress. And what Alan says, don't talk to the patient, talk with the patient. And a lot of what you were saying, Jude, was that engagement with the patient community outside of a busy clinic, where probably you have a bit more headspace to consider how best to approach consultations with patients. So thanks for that, Alan. I'm going to come to Cindy and Mike now, because we've talked about pockets of patient knowledge and experience, and we've got a very good representation of high levels of knowledge and experience on this panel. But there's also physicians and their level of experience and knowledge in not just the science, but in how to approach supporting patients through life transitions. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we can transfer that knowledge more widely through peer-to-peer education and connection. I'm going to start with you, Cindy, and then I'll come to you, Mike, if that's okay. So, Cindy, if you kick things off, how do we improve peer-to-peer knowledge transfer?
Yeah, and I'll just speak to this sort of from my own experience, working in the field and then obviously working in companies. But I think we can definitely identify the need, right, to talk with someone who has experience or has previously treated patients with rare disease, and someone who's eager and motivated and wants to learn, and having opportunities to do that. And whoever is the conduit, right, whether it's the patient, whether it's somehow like a medical representative who identifies that need, and really seeing that we're all in this together, right? We're all the community, and we're all, wanting to support the patients and are inspired, right, by the patients. I think also recognizing, and Judy was getting to this as well, of not every patient's journey is the same at all, right? So we're going to be learning throughout the process, and everybody who hears or works with a patient is interested in helping the patient achieve the best outcomes. And so whatever it takes, right? Whatever other specialists you can bring in, or what other advocacy or organizations you can recommend.
Yeah. So it's not just about that transfer of knowledge, it's transfer of connections to different organizations, it's consideration of other healthcare professionals that may support better outcomes for the patient. All that makes sense to me, Cindy. And Mike, have you got anything else to add around that sort of peer-to-peer knowledge transfer?
Well, just one example of how we're trying. There's a trend toward trying to make information more accessible, not only to the specialists but to other physicians and to patients. something called a plain language summary or a lay summary. For example, we had an article published recently about narcolepsy, and coming out with that soon will be a digest basically of the article in language that's not too technical. And that's intended, again, for the interested physician who would like to get up to speed on this new information, as well as for patients, so that they can better understand the latest developments. And that study in particular includes some information about how to transition from one type of care to another, to a different type of care. So it seems right up there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you started to see these plain language summaries housed on patient advocacy organization websites and stuff. So I think it's a positive step forward in terms of transparency. I'm coming to you, Rita. I'm coming. I definitely want responses from physicians here around that knowledge transfer. So Rita, any thoughts?
Oh yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you now.
No worries.
I think it's already a great step forward that we have the plain language summary. So normally it's a shorter version as well. It's good. But we shouldn't forget that lots of rare disease patients do not speak English good enough. So we have this problem in Europe, and I would say that those who do not speak English good enough, they have at least 50% lower chance to get the same treatment as those who can read in English. Yeah. And that is a big problem. So right now there are really good automatic translations, where if somebody then just have to correct the few mistakes, so it doesn't have to be an official translation, but a translation would even make it better.
No, it's a really good point, and translation should be an imperative to ensure that knowledge gets out there as widely as possible, particularly when we're considering Europe. And even the US in terms of non-English speaking US residents. Tom, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think so. I review plain language summaries for another company, and the progress that's been made is really good. It's really important, and I think that there's going to be increasing demand for them, and they're even nice to look at now as well. Like when you working for the Research Ethics Committee, sometimes you get applications and they have obviously patient information sheets, and some of them are like 6,500 words long. And it's just like, it's completely useless. It serves no purpose whatsoever, and it does not inform the patient or really anybody else in the slightest. And I suppose the other thing that I wanted to say was to touch on something that Jude said, which is, she mentioned the, questions to ask your physician kind of thing. And I suppose just coming back to a thought that I've had, I think that what you have in certainly adolescent to adult transitions in care is you have a really, really good opportunity to teach people how to advocate for their own interests. And you have the opportunity as a physician or a care team that knows that person really well, you have the opportunity to establish a habit and a routine, an approach to their own healthcare for the rest of their life. And I think that it's and I really appreciate that in some kind of, in more rare diseases than CF, the physicians, first kind of priority is going to be finding out about the disease, for example. But I think you just got the opportunity to set the tone for the rest of their life when it comes to their own care. And I think you have to, where possible, as much as you're juggling other things, help them advocate for their own interests and really empower them as much as possible, because then you're going to get the best clinical outcomes anyway.
Great stuff. Did you read the question from Rebecca, Tom? Because he pretty much answered it around what advice would you give others in terms of advocating for yourselves? So that's to you and Nathan.
But if I've answered it, that's great.
Any other advice? How have you stepped up, would you say, in terms of self-advocating?
I don't think there's anywhere you learn it. You're just a difficult person and a headstrong person, or not. I hate to keep it that simple, but you know, in all jest, I didn't. My mom, 20 years, she had this disease. We didn't understand anything about it. I couldn't even keep the acronyms straight. It wasn't until I became a patient that it really then all of a sudden mattered. And especially when I saw that there was no kind of organization around it, or one researcher was collecting data, but what happened when she was out of the picture, that something needed to be done. And so I do think it's just one of those things that, you know, especially with the strong advocates, you just see these A-type personalities that just get after it. And so that's probably not the right response, but we are trying to equip. I want to tell a real funny story. You know, it's not just on the pharma company or the physician, you know, putting this data together. We created a brochure, a pamphlet to hand to patients, to new patients, or to physicians. And the Mayo Clinic refused to hand it out because it was at a 12th grade reading level when they wanted something at a 6th or 7th grade reading level. So we printed 5,000 of these things, and we're like, man, how are we going to get rid of them? So, you know, it's a problem on the patient advocacy organization too, that we have to, this lay language, absolutely. You know, and the patient advocacy organization can make the same mistake too. So
yeah. And one final question, then we're going to sum up most definitely, because we did start late, but we are getting close to the hour, if not over the hour. And it's on your point around, well, beyond language, what about digital exclusion for patients? Any thoughts on how we can empower patients who may not have access or the ability to educate themselves through digital means? Any thoughts from anyone? What about you, Rita, from an ERN perspective? Have consideration been given around supporting patients?
So project that there is a platform where the patients could have a virtual visit with theoretically experts from all over the Europe. Yeah. And the main idea is that not the patient should travel, but the knowledge should travel. So not the patient should travel to the expert, but the knowledge should travel through this virtual platform to the patient. But to be honest, that doesn't really work, but I think that would be a really great opportunity for ultra rare diseases, where in some small countries there are not at all really great experts. And the experts can have consultation with each other about a special case as well. So what Judith mentioned, that when you say that, okay, I'm an expert for this rare disease, but I would like to have the opinion from this patient. And I'm sure that experts do that via emails already, but this is higher level of this expertise exchange.
Yeah.
For just patients, we are considering some apps what patients could use. So we see lots of opportunity there, but we do not really have a result until now.
Yeah, and the pandemic has accelerated those opportunities undoubtedly, but we need to reduce the disparities in digital access to really make the most of these different types of remote consultations. I'm conscious of time. Thanks, everyone. It's been a really great discussion. I want you to, if you don't mind, leave everyone with one thought on how transition can be improved. And I'm going to go around as I see people. So I'm going to start with you, Cindy, then Tom, then Nathan, Rita, Mike, and Jude. So Cindy, one thing that's going to help improve transition for patients.
I would say brevity. and really making impact and doing it in a way that's inclusive, right? That understands the heterogeneity. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Tom.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think the best thing that you can do to help in the transition phase is to help people help themselves. I think by and large, you're dealing with people who are taking on a completely new challenge in a way that's very unfamiliar to them, and they probably need your help to be able to help themselves.
Thanks, Tom. Nathan?
Yeah, I think Tom hit on this earlier, but I really think that empathetic language from a physician, and I'm not an empathetic person, so, and certainly a researcher, I understand it's difficult, but, what I remember from one of my first appointments was the doctor looking, there's nothing that can be done, but he's like, what is it that triggers something, in your body in your mid-30s? And so that actually, that stuck with me. It made me feel more comfortable that he was interested and inquisitive in what was going on with me. And so that's reassuring to a patient, just those small little language details, just a little bit of that empathy and trying to understand versus, well, there's nothing I can do for you. See you next time. So I really do think that language, that call it bedside manner, whatever, is really important in that transition.
Thanks, Nathan. Rita?
I think the best would be if we wouldn't need transition at all. I have a vision that it is that I don't like that the medical treatment is absolutely decided whether it's a pediatric age or whether it's an adult age. I think that rare disease patients should be seen as a family, because lots of time more family member. I have managed that we have our ultrasound examination, for example, all three of us at one ultrasound specialist. So we won't need any transition for my sons when they will be 16, 18, because we managed to do that all together. I hope that there will be more and more places where experts will be there for the whole family and not just for children or adults.
Yeah, it just flows rather than.
Yeah, and then you if you don't need a transition, then it can't be too early or too late or not properly performed. But then we don't need our panel at all.
Let's make ourselves redundant, Rita. Mike, over to you. Are you there, Mike? I think we'll come to you, Jude, if that's okay.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So one thing. Openness, and I've written down openness, honesty, and space in a consultation, and trying to, as a clinician, trying to remember to see the person as a person, not as a really interesting rare disease.
Yeah.
So that's so looking at the whole person, and making the space for, is there anything else that, this morning I think I saw a patient, I asked 2 or 3 times, is there anything else that you wanted to talk to me about today? And sort of on the second time something came out, and the third time something else came out. And so allowing that space and giving patients permission to, not that they should need it, but sometimes they think they need it, to ask what's really important to them.
Yeah. Lovely. Great sentiment to end on. And thank you all so much for all your insight and thoughts. It's been a pleasure to work with you all. And Jeff, apologies to you, we've run over, but hopefully it was a good conversation for the audience. And I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Gavin. Absolutely not a problem running over. This was a great panel, great conversation. It looks like people were chatting, and I think that everyone loved what you had to say. And to each and every one of you, and to Open Health, thank you for this time and your time. I know that here it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but over there it's in your evening hours, with a lot of you. I really appreciate you taking the time, and Eden and I both do so much. So thank you all. At the 3 o'clock hour, we have a single parents of rare disease patients, and it'll be a panel discussion. If anybody can stay on and join that, I think it's going to be a great panel. Thank you all again, and thank you for participating in 24 Hours of Rare.